Now, the Pentagon says 2 Venezuelan F-16 fighter jets flew near a US Navy vessel in international waters Thursday in a, quote, highly provocative move. This marks a new escalation in the two countries' standoff over Washington's Caribbean deployment. During a trip to neighboring Ecuador on Thursday, Secretary of State Marco Rubio underlined the US's increasingly aggressive stance towards Venezuelan leader Nicolás Maduro.
Nicolás Maduro is an indicted drug trafficker in the United States, and he's a fugitive of American justice. We're not just going to hunt for drug dealers with the little fast boats and say, oh, let's try to arrest him. No, the president has said he wants to wage war on these groups because they've been waging war on us for 30 years and no one has responded. But there's no need to do that in many cases with the friendly governments, because the friendly governments are going to help us. They may do it themselves, and we'll help them do it.
In Caracas, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro says imperialism is launching a new attack that is aimed at regime change. He insists his country will stand firm, but he will be relying on China for help.
A speedboat in international waters hit by a US airstrike. The Trump administration claims, without providing evidence, that the boat was being used to smuggle drugs. It is the first attack by US forces since their deployment in the Caribbean, just outside Venezuela's territorial waters. The White House says their goal is to combat threats from drug cartels, which the Trump administration claims are being run by Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. Caracas has responded by deploying troops along the coast and urging millions to join the militia.
In response to maximum military pressure, we have declared maximum readiness for the defense of Venezuela. In the face of maximum pressure, maximum readiness.
Caught in a sudden standoff with the US, Maduro has been keen to emphasize his relationship with other powerful countries. Top of that list is the main US rival, China. Venezuela has become reliant on Chinese support after years of economic mismanagement and US sanctions. But their relationship is not an equal one. With hyperinflation rising and millions of Venezuelans facing food insecurity, the economy is vastly dependent on oil exports. In June and July of this year, over 90% of those were destined for China. But Venezuelan petroleum was estimated to make up only around 5% of China's total oil imports in the same period. Beijing has also lent Maduro's government around $60 billion to help prop up the economy, more than it has lent to the rest of the continent combined. While this makes Venezuela a useful strategic and trade partner for Beijing, it makes China vitally important for Caracas. As tensions with the US rise, Maduro has tried to emphasize his relationship with Xi Jinping, showing off a supposedly unhackable phone gifted to him by the Chinese president. And China has responded to the US deployment in the Caribbean, saying they oppose the use or threat of force in international relations and the interference of external forces in Venezuela's internal affairs under any pretext. But just how China would react to any direct conflict between the US and Venezuela remains, for now, unclear.
And I'm joined here in the studio by DW correspondent Oscar Schlenker, who reported for a very long time in Venezuela. You're actually from Venezuela as well. Oscar, the question we're asking, I guess, is we're seeing these tensions ratchet up between the United States and Venezuela. What could China's response potentially be if this were to break out into a direct conflict?
Well, I think China knows that Venezuela is a very strategic geopolitical partner in the region. It's the one that's received the most financial help from China. But China has also noticed that a lot of those projects that it has done in Venezuela have not been completed because of corruption and mishandlement of those funds. We didn't see a direct quote from Xi Jinping himself on this matter, but on a foreign political envoy. So it would be very difficult to say what China would do in this situation. I think they would also talk about a little bit of interference in terms of their relationship with Taiwan and the U.S. criticizing that relationship in this situation.
Yeah, could you just maybe make more of the point that you made initially about why China is investing so heavily in Venezuela? Why is Venezuela such a strategic asset for China in that sense?
Well, for one thing, it's one of the countries that opposes the U.S. in the region, and that's why it's received so much help from China financially. I think there's a debt of over $15 billion from Venezuela to China. And China does want to have that money returned or that investment seen. And regime change or a change in government in Venezuela would hinder that return that China has invested in Venezuela.
And just give us a sense of how ordinary Venezuelans are reacting to President Maduro's claims of the U.S. Threatening an invasion.
Well, I think Venezuelans are very worried because even though there is a threat of an improbable invasion of the U.S. and Venezuela, it's improbable that they will invade Venezuela. But this increase in tensions does increase tensions within the country. And Maduro's government has already said that the more they pressure the pressure they get from the U.S., the more they're going to pressure the opposition in Venezuela. And that means a lot more restrictions and a lot more persecution in the country. And we're seeing that already. So a lot of people are worried, not only because of what the U.S. might do, but what the government does under pressure of the U.S. inside Venezuela.
Yeah, and you have the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He called the Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro a drug trafficker. Is there evidence to suggest that the Maduro government is involved in the drug trade?
Well, there is a very heavy investigation on this cartel of the suns. They're called cartel of the suns because of the sun insignia that the military have on their uniforms. And it's not the common cartel that we know of that has a hierarchy like the cartels in Colombia or in Mexico. These military personnel in Venezuela that are involved in drug trafficking and many other criminal activities are like a network. And it's very hard to pinpoint who the leaders or the hierarchy is. But there is no doubt that Maduro knows about it, has these connections, either has neglected it or has turned the other eye. But there are some involvements in some directions like that. And we saw that a few years ago, his nephews were imprisoned in the U.S. for drug trafficking with evidence that they were meddling in these illegal activities. But it's not only drug trafficking, it's also human trafficking, it's also illegal mining. These military personnel are involved in a series of criminal activity along Venezuela, and that impacts the whole region.
Well, Oscar, it's fascinating stuff, and thank you for breaking it all down for us. The situation there between the US and Venezuela, and of course, the involvement of China. That is DW's Oscar Schlenker here in studio with me.